city of brotherly love where Stephen A. is. Eagles cornerback Brandon Boykin was traded to the Steelers on Saturday for a conditional fifth-round pick. In a text message to Comcast Sportsnet, Boykin had this to say about his former coach, Chip Kelly. He can't relate, and that makes him uncomfortable. He likes total control of everything, and you don't like to be uncomfortable. Players excel when you let them naturally be who they are, and in my experience, that hasn't been important to him. But you guys have heard this before. Chip Kelly responded to Boykin's comments on Sunday. Take a listen.
Talking to him last night, I think he was stunned. He was disappointed. I think he really liked it here. Very close with his teammates. I told him I thought the timing itself wasn't a real good time, but they actively pursued him. They wanted to trade for him at the draft, and we turned it down. And they called last week and turned it down again. And then when we sat down with Corey and Billy and Ed as a group and looked at the offer that they made for us, and kind of really, it's more speaks to what our depth was at the position. We felt like it was a move to make. He left here last night. Shook my hand, gave me a hug, so didn't say anything. Billy felt the same way when he left, and I like Brandon. I just don't know. I really don't know.
Boykin clarified his comments to ESPN. When you're a player, you want to be able to relate to your coach off the field. There were times he just didn't talk to people. You would walk down the hallway, he wouldn't say anything to you. I'm not saying he's a racist in any way. I felt a lot of guys in that locker room feel the same way. Of course, when you're in that organization, you're not going to voice your opinion. For me, I've always been a guy of honesty, not trying to put anybody out in any way. But if you're honest with me, I'll be honest with you. And I felt like that honesty wasn't there all the time. Stephen A., we begin with you. What's your reaction to all of this?
My reaction is that I'm not surprised. I mean, obviously, I was in the middle of it all because I reported on this months ago. And I want to reiterate, I don't know Chip Kelly from a can of paint. All I know is that he's the coach of the Philadelphia Eagles. I've never met him, never talked to him, never had a conversation with him. I was at one of his press conferences when I was in Philadelphia because I do go to Lincoln Financial Field at least once or twice a season. But that's about all. I mean, I don't have any relationship with him whatsoever, so I don't know. And obviously, you're not going to go as far as to call this man racist or anything like that. That would be incredibly irresponsible on my part. Somebody that's never met him, that doesn't know him or whatever. But what I've said repeatedly, and as I came on this show, Skip, and said right in front of you, there were players on the Eagles who've told me that. And there were several of them. And this is going back to more than a year ago. And regardless of what anybody wants to say, this feeds off of the whole Riley Cooper scandal. Where he was at a country music concert, a bit inebriated, and, used the N-word, threatening folks about what he would do to every you-know-what up in here. And obviously, we all know what the aftermath of that was. Riley Cooper, the players were a bit turned off by it, to say the least. So much so that the Eagles felt compelled to send Riley Cooper away for some healing, some counseling, or whatever the case may be. He was gone on a Friday. He was back that Tuesday. And when you look at it from that perspective, clearly guys are going to have an issue with it. When you think about some of the things that guys are saying, what Boykin just said, what LaShawn McCoy alluded to, what Trey Thomas, the former Philadelphia Eagles, who ultimately became a coaching intern, and obviously still very, very closely connected to a lot of folks that were, at least a lot of folks that were in that locker room a year ago. It was some of the things that they expressed openly. And if you believe for 1 second that those three guys are the only guys that feel the way that they expressed, you've got your head in the sand. You're not paying attention. And so that's what this all comes down to. Because when you think about a guy like Riley Cooper, Skip Bayless, I have said this to you on many occasions. And I've listened to Louis Riddick. I've listened to Herm Edwards. You know how I feel about both of those guys. Profound respect for my colleagues. Love them both. They're both great at what they do. But I respectfully challenge what both of them had to say this morning on Mike and Mike when they summarily dismissed what these guys were feeling. Because what it comes down to is this. LaShawn McCoy, gone. Deshaun Jackson a year earlier, gone. Jeremy Maclin, gone. Riley Cooper is still there. Riley Cooper is a marginal talent, to say the least. Riley Cooper is somebody that was rated by Pro Football Focus as the worst wide receiver in the entire NFL out of 110 wide receivers who have played at least 25% of the time, this dude was ranked 110th. That's what this is. 980 snaps, just how many receptions? 55 receptions, 572 yards. Can't run after a catch, can't get open, runs the wrong routes, drops footballs in crucial moments, but somehow, some way, he was somebody that was deemed acceptable and attractive enough for Chip Kelly to keep, whereas other dudes, that wasn't necessarily the case. Now, to be fair to Riley Cooper, he did have a better year the year before than he did last season. And the contract that Chip Kelly gave him, which is a 5-year, $22.5 million deal, $8 million in guarantees, a $4 million sign-up bonus, we understand that was believed to be a very good and attractive contract based on his level of production. But what you must understand is that black players are not looking at it that way. At least some of them are not, when you take into account how they believe they were treated. And even though people can sit there and talk about Chip Kelly having an open door policy, and they can talk about how anybody can talk to Chip Kelly, and they can talk about all those different things, you can't sit there and legislate what's in somebody's heart, not just in terms of how they act, but also how those who are on the receiving end, how they're going to interpret how you act. So me personally, I have no justification for sitting there and labeling Chip Kelly negatively. Neither do you, Skip, or anybody else out there who doesn't deal with them. But if you are a player inside that locker room and you have to deal with him on a daily basis, the kind of vibe that you receive from him, the kind of relationship you may or may not have with him, the manner in which he may choose to or elect not to communicate with you, all of those things resonate. And my last point on this matter, Skip, at this moment in time will be this. We got some die-hard, old-school, hardcore coaches in the NFL, historically as well as presently, whether it's the Bill Parcells and Jimmy Johnsons of the world, to a Tom Coughlin, to a Mike McCarthy, to a Bill Belichick, to a lesser degree the Sean Paytons of the world and others. Andy Reid even, now in Kansas City, formerly in Philadelphia for 14 years. This was never said about them. And they've had a plethora of players that they let go of, black, white, and beyond. Those things weren't said about those guys, but suddenly it's being said about Chip Kelly. I wonder why. I think it's a legitimate question.
Allow me to preface my response to your response by saying, once again, I want to applaud you, Stephen A. Smith, for standing up on this show and saying what you said more than a year ago, because you were right, you were ahead of that curve. You were on point, and you were ahead of that story. And for the sake of our show, I appreciate that very much. You stood your ground. Took some flack, you took some heat, took some shots, and you said, no, this is what I'm hearing from black players inside that locker room, Philadelphia's locker room, and from some people in the black community who are merely stepping back and saying, what's going on here? We're starting to wonder about this coach of this team. In the wake of an Andy Reid who was obviously seen as a player's coach. So again, that contrast is unfair to Chip Kelly because Andy Reid was beloved almost to a fault by all of his players, no matter what color. And before I proceed, Stephen A., just to be fair to Chip Kelly here, he said that in the end, yesterday, Brandon Boykin, I guess it was the day before, Brandon Boykin shook his hand, according to Chip, and hugged him. So we need to keep that on the record. And again, not in defense of Chip Kelly, but being objective here before I proceed, that kid they drafted out of Utah in the second round, that cornerback who can play slot or outside, that Eric Rowe, they're raving about him, so I get that. Now, I'm a Brandon Boykin fan, and I'll tell you why. Every time I'm rooting against the Eagles, it seems like he makes a big play against my Cowboys. So I would want him on my team. And obviously, Mike Tomlin badly wanted him, or wanted him badly enough, on his team. Fourth rounder, it's actually a fifth that could become a fourth if he plays 60% of the snaps this year, and he originally was a fourth-round pick. So Philly, you can argue, got even there. Now, back to your premise here. I need your help on this, Mr. Smith. Again and again, I hear the black players speak out, or at least try to put in perspective the way they were treated by Chip Kelly, but they always end their criticisms by saying, but I'm not saying he's a racist. You have often said, I don't know Chip Kelly, I don't know if he's a racist. Yet the behavior you describe, because they're describing it, the behavior that Brandon Boykin just described, he's uncomfortable around grown men of our culture, it smacks of racist behavior. Is that fair to say? I'm not concluding he's a racist, but isn't that where we're heading with these comments?
Well, you know what? I'm the wrong person to ask that question to, because I think, Skip, a discomfort with a culture or somebody's behavior doesn't necessarily make you racist. I don't
Okay.
believe in that. I know black folks that are uncomfortable with today's generation in terms of some of the things that they see. And they're obviously not racist, so I can't sit there and say that. I think that's unfair. I think to use that to highlight some racial undertones with Chip Kelly just based on that, I don't think you could sit there and say the man is racist based on that. I agree with that.
Okay, fair enough. Is it fair merely to conclude that he's not all that comfortable interacting with talented black players in the football context of a team that he is the head man of, the coach of? Because that's what I keep hearing again and again from Deshaun, LaShawn, Brandon Boykin.
Well, I would say to you, Skip Bayless, that it's fair in the sense that they played for him, so they have been around him, and they know what their personal interaction is with him. If it were me, you, or anybody else who have not been around Chip Kelly, who doesn't play for Chip Kelly, who hasn't had to interact with Chip Kelly, it would be grotesquely unfair to do that to that man. But if I am communicating with you every day, if I am around you, then even though I express it verbally, words don't fully grasp how palpable and real it is to me based on my personal interaction with you. So we could take things in terms of what guys say, and you know what? We can look at it. I'll flip it for you, Skip. Chip Kelly highlighted how Boykin basically hugged him and left. Let me tell you how this goes. Skip Bayless, you might not be able to stand the boss. You might not like him or whatever. But you understand that it's incumbent upon you to leave and exit with some degree of professional decorum or whatever the case may be. Yep. Chip Kelly could have extended his hand. Boykin could have sat there and extended his hand as well. And Chip Kelly would have came up to him and he just went like that and walked away. Chip Kelly's, the way Chip Kelly spoke, you giving the impression like the brother just picked you up and gave you a bear hug, kissed you on the cheek and said, Coach, I love you, goodbye, thank you for everything. That's clearly not what Boykin did. So, when you sit there and say he gave me a hug, really? I mean, come on now. That's not necessarily genuine on Chip Kelly's part, to be quite honest with you.
Okay, now keep this in perspective. Chip Kelly in Philadelphia has been a rather mysterious figure, even to those in the Philly media who cover him on a daily basis. It was even unclear in his bio. His bio suggested he'd never been married, so that got written about. Here's a guy who's only married to football. Then the Washington Post, as you probably know, recently reported that Chip Kelly was married, which is neither here nor there, except it makes him even more mysterious that he was married for 7 years back in the 90s, okay? So people are having a hard time sort of getting a read on Chip Kelly. This is my 2 cents from a distance, Stephen A., just watching him operate. I believe he, Chip Kelly, wants to be the star of this show. As Brandon Boykin said, he wants total control in as much as, and these are my words, he wants coachable cogs and only coachable cogs. And let's start with his stars. We know DeMarco Murray. We've had him on this show, 2-3 times? What do you always kid DeMarco about? He's worse than the CIA. He'll say nothing about nobody on our show. Nothing controversial. DeMarco Murray, the one I know, the guy I know, is a high-character, low-maintenance superstar running back. So that was a perfect fit for Chip Kelly. He doesn't need a lot of love from Chip. He's just going to do his job as hard as he can do it day after day. Sam Bradford, now obviously we're going from black to white. Sam Bradford is the nicest young man you will ever meet. He is extremely coachable. Coachable cog. Obviously, Chip Kelly was the only coach in the league. Who would have added? Tim Tebow. What do we always say about Tim? He is the nicest young man you'll ever meet. An extremely coachable cog. Riley Cooper never makes waves about anything until he got caught on that cell phone saying the most evil word in our language, the one ending in the hard ER, right to that cell phone. I'll whip every you-know-what in this place. And I said the day after, you got to cut this man. You got to get him out of the locker room. Chip Kelly chose to keep him in the locker room. And I'm assuming because Chip Kelly really likes him as a football player, a coachable cog. He'll block. He'll make the occasional catch. He'll always run the right route. So if he thinks he can win with Riley Cooper, God bless you, Chip Kelly. Now, again, is that racist behavior, or is that just a man who says, I'm going to do this my way? I don't want highly talented black or white or whatever color players who sort of want to go their own way, who want to speak out, who occasionally make waves, who often ask why. Again, should we condemn him for that, or is that just the way he coaches his football team? I ask you that question.
Skip, he shouldn't be condemned for that based on what you're talking about, and I totally agree with you. But for the purposes of those outside of the black community, to sort of be a bit more enlightened about those inside the black community, it's important to point out Riley Cooper, because it's not about what Riley Cooper said. You can sit there. Some people may not want to forgive him. Some people could get past it. You thought he should have been cut immediately. I sat there and said, give the man a second chance. I thought he was inebriated. He at a country music concert. He made a mistake. Suspend the guy or whatever, because obviously he impugned the integrity of the league because he brought negative attention to it. But at the same time, let's move on. We can move on. What you have to understand, and folks outside the black community need to understand, is that the brothers on the Philadelphia Eagles didn't have but so much to say, not just because they played for the Philadelphia Eagles, but also because they turned around and said, okay, how are you going to handle this? Jeffrey Lurie, Howie Roseman at the time, Chip Kelly, the list goes on and on. From an organizational perspective, why do we have to address this ad nauseum? What are you going to do? And when Chip Kelly comes out and basically says it's unfortunate, but Riley Cooper, we like him. He's got the support of the team, blah, blah, blah. Well, you basically spoke for everybody. But you weren't speaking for everybody. People were waiting to see what you wanted to do. And then not only does Riley Cooper leave for a weekend, but he comes back and then ends up getting a new contract right around the time you decide that Deshaun Jackson, one of the biggest, most lethal deep threats in the entire NFL, leaves. And not only does he leave, but you're talking about his character while he walks out the door. This information just oozed out of the Philadelphia Eagles. You know, the company he keeps.
Thank you.
Is he a member of a gang? Blah, 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 blah. So, and then all of a sudden, even though we never heard Chip Kelly say this, the assumption was, or what columnists and editorials surmised, is that he wasn't Chip Kelly's kind of guy. We fast forward to a summer. LaShawn McCoy wasn't necessarily Chip Kelly's kind of guy. Jeremy Maclin wanted a little bit more money than Chip Kelly was willing to spend. But we hear all of these reasons and rationales as to why far superior talent walks out the door, but somebody like Riley Cooper, who is clearly inferior to the talent that I mentioned, somehow, some way you find a way to keep him on your roster. And then when you take all of those things into consideration, Skip, when you take all of that into consideration, and then you're Chip Kelly, and you barely even address it, you're very dismissive about it. Please, I ain't got time for all of that, whatever the case may be. It speaks to that, because if he's dismissive in front of the cameras, when you're asking him direct questions about these allegations levied against him, how is he off camera?
Okay, last quick question.
Inquiring minds want to know. Sure.
Yeah, I know. I got you. How do you feel like, just your educated guess, that this underlying let's say, uneasiness with Chip Kelly among the black players still residing in the Eagles locker room, how will that affect this football team going forward?
Well, I think as long as you have leaders, I mean, when you have somebody like Malcolm Jenkins who was there, speaking up on Chip Kelly's behalf, I think that resonates. Not so much Mark Sanchez, because who gives a damn what he has to say? Try not throwing interceptions. Try being somebody that's valid and formidable when it really, really counts. We don't care about anything Mark Sanchez has to say other than whether or not he's going to throw passes. When you look at an abundance of other players coming to his defense, does that help him? Sure. And I think that they'll be fine, because at the end of the day, what we really care about once the games start being played are the actual games. That's what we really care about. But in the end, what it really comes down to more than anything else, Skip, is that we're twisting this in the wrong direction. Guys who left, like LaShawn McCoy and Boykin, and, fellas that are still in the league, you know why they're backtracking? Skip, because they know the potential is there for them to be blackballed. They're not going to be honest. They can't be honest. I mean, and you're putting the onus on them. What they did was tell you honestly what they felt from their heart. And they weren't just speaking for themselves. They were speaking for quite a few brothers in that locker room. I am not asking you. Maybe somebody will take heed and remember that I've been doing this for about 22 years. I'm not playing. It ain't just them who feels that way. There's a few brothers up in that locker room that feel that way about Chip Kelly. This is not about a white guy. This is not for white folks to be out there and get all up in a tizzy and be defensive. Nobody's talking about white folks. Talking about Chip Kelly, him specifically. You haven't heard that about Bill Belichick. You haven't heard that about Tom Coughlin. You haven't heard that about Sean Payton. You haven't heard that about Bill Parcells or Belichick, or the list goes on and on. You didn't hear that about Jason Garrett. You didn't hear that about Mike McCarthy. You haven't heard that about Andy Reid. You didn't hear that about anybody. You're hearing it about Chip. And what people are trying to change the narrative to mount a certain level of pressure on the players, and the players know what time it is. That's just code for, you better shut the hell up if you want to stay in this league. Because you keep spewing this stuff, you ain't going to last long. And they ain't trying to lose their careers because they want to express themselves for Chip Kelly. They did it once. They said what they had to say. Don't expect it to happen again, because they're not going to do it. And I personally don't blame them. They don't need to. They said what needed to be said. I told you what they were feeling. It is what it is.